Hello everybody, Alan Bowley here again with another instalment of our somewhat virtual nature rambles. I do hope you're all keeping well and managing to keep sane during this extended period of isolated living. If you joined me on our last outing, you might now be a bit more aware of the birds in the air outside your window or the plants and insects in your gardens or hedge banks along the lanes. Enjoyment of the natural world, just what the doctor ordered to add some joy to this strange time. Well, it's early May now and there's been a fair bit of rain, so summer must be just round the corner. So let's explore some more and see how Mother Nature is literally bursting into life. We're going to have a look at the birds of the real aerial masters of the summer this week. One swallow is not a summer mate, says the old proverb, and as usual it's not far from the truth. I saw my first swallows of the year on the 21st of April, and 2 days later it was rain and wind in the south of England, and in Sweden it was snowing. But the sun isn't far away, so the swallows have a lot of work to do. Having flown an incredible round trip of 12,000 kilometres to their wintering homes in South Africa and back, sometimes arriving at the same nest as last year, they're relying on a good crop of insects to build up their strength for breeding. The characteristic features are the blue-brown body with a red throat and contrasting white undersides and that long forked tail. But beware, sometimes you can't see the tail at all, and youngsters scarcely have one at all when they're first out of the nest. Well, goodness knows where swallows nested before humans started building houses and barns, because nests are particularly there in barns, garages, under bridges and so forth. They often appear quite tame, don't they? Not bothering too much about anyone's business rather than their own. One of our most famous naturalists was a clergyman called Gilbert White, who lived in Selborne in Hampshire in the 18th century. In the year that the French Revolution broke out, 1789, he published his Natural History of Selborne, and it's been in print ever since. White was curious about many things. He tested whether or not bees could hear by shouting at them through a megaphone, and struggled for many years to understand where swallows went in winter. At first, like many others, he thought they must hibernate in the mud or in caves in winter, because they were often last seen over water in the autumn. Eventually he concluded that some at least did fly south, and now we know exactly where they go and the challenges that they encounter on the way, such as flying over vast deserts and the decline in numbers of insects to feed on. Well, the bird most likely to be confused with the swallow is the house martins, but just look for one thing, that white band around their rump just in front of the tail. Swallows never have this, and house martins never have the long tail of the swallow, although they do have a short forked tail. What charmers they are! I get very grumpy if they don't use the nest on my house, or if the sparrows get there first. Their quiet shattering twitter is one of the most calming sounds of nature. Well, I think so anyway. One thing which is as important for house martins as it is for swallows is mud, because that's what their nests are made of. So if it's dry when they're building or repairing old nests, they can be in trouble. You might be able to put out a tray of wet mud in front of your house. It could help, you never know. Another way you can help is by installing artificial nests for house martins under the eaves of your house, and so you can enjoy their charming activities all summer. I have to say it might be advisable to put some cling film on your lower windowsills, as they can make a bit of a mess. Or you could try this, as Gilbert White's brother did in 1782, and this is what he wrote in his book. My brother Thomas White nailed up several large scallop shells under the eaves of his house at South Lambeth to see if the house martins were building them. These conveniences had not been fixed half an hour before several pairs settled upon them and began to build immediately. Now, it's relatively easy to distinguish house martins and swallows, but sand martins are not quite so straightforward. And you're less likely to see them in town. They're more of a coastal bird or in along rivers where there are sandy banks. Basically, they don't have either the long tail streamers or the white rump, but they do have a brown band around their chest. Nor do they nest in barns, houses or nest boxes. Like the rooks we saw and heard last time, sand martins like to nest in colonies, and instead of trees they use deep holes in sandbanks and quarries. Many nature reserves have done a splendid job in providing artificial banks for them with ready drilled holes. Well, swallows and martins are all part of the same family, the hirundines, but another marvellous member of the summer aerial display is the swift, which is not related but can be confused with the others. I spoke to a friend recently who lives in London, and he was rather missing the bustle of the town and the noise of the planes and the traffic and the sirens during the restrictions. But I think there's something far more exciting to wait for now that the other noise has died down. And that's the frenzied screaming of swifts, which will soon fill the skies of our towns and villages. The swift is known as the squealer in Sussex, the devil's screecher in Devon, and the deviling in some other counties. Not very complimentary for an extraordinary bird which may not touch the ground from the time it leaves its nest to swooping back over your local town to when it returns 8 months later. They sleep, mate and eat in the air. Like the swallows and martins too, they managed incredibly to navigate their way across the Sahara Desert down to Central Africa to spend the winter. Swifts have tiny little legs and cannot easily take to the air if they come to ground. They're more used to clinging onto the edges of cliffs and houses. I remember that very distinctly because I once picked up a bird off the road where it had been hit by a car. I put it in a box for a few hours, and when it had recovered, I threw it up in the air and it happily flew away. Actually, it wasn't that happy for this poor swift, because there's another bird that migrates with the swifts, and that's a beautiful falcon called the hobby, which specialises in preying on swifts and swallows. And there happened to be a hobby in the vicinity at the time I let this swift away, and yeah, you know what happened. Well, that's nature for you. So keep an eye and an ear out for these noisy and enthusiastic birds. You can't help but smile, particularly when the youngsters are out of the nest and are charging around yelling at the tops of their voices. By the way, just a thought, this current virus has meant that we're all aware how we're all sharing in this together. Interesting to note that when you look up at the swifts and swallows around your house, people across Europe, from Sweden to Spain, across to Poland and Russia, are doing just the same thing. Well, that's it for the early birds of summer. What is there a bit closer to the ground? Well, let's start with red campion. This is a plant that grows in relatively shady places that has deep pink petals and flowers from late April right the way through much of the summer. It's part of the family which includes the pinks and the catchflies, some of which have sticky stems, hence the name. You'll probably find it more in shady places, and if you look carefully you may notice that the flowers don't all look the same. This is because the male and female flowers are born on different plants. Have a close look and see if you can spot the difference. A little later in the summer you may find white campion and bladder campion, and if you're able to get down to the seaside, sea campion grows along the shingle. By the way, if you do find it, Be careful not to trample it. These shingle-loving plants can be easily destroyed by our feet. An old country name for all these campions and catchflies was bachelor's buttons. Well, just one more plant for this week, and this is another for garlic lovers, if any of you listened last time and when we were talking about ramsons. Garlic mustard. I prefer the old name Jack by the Hedge, and that's precisely where you're likely to find it, standing proud and upright in the long grass along shady hedge banks. If you rub the soft, shiny green leaves, you'll get the garlicky smell, and you can use it in a salad. It's a biennial plant, so the leaves of the first year will not produce flowers, but overwinter to produce the flowers in the spring of the following year. Now, if you remember last time, we looked at violets, and I was talking about how important they were for fritillary butterflies. Well, Jack by the Hedge is equally important to a butterfly which you may already have seen this year, and that's the orange tip. If you've seen a small cabbage white with orange on its wingtips and a mottled greenish underside, then you've spotted a male orange tip. The female has brownish wingtips. But the caterpillar feeds on Jack by the Hedge, or cuckoo flower, also known as lady's smock, which has pale pink petals and can be very abundant in damp places. Well, I hope you've enjoyed meeting some of the birds and flowers that we find in early summer, and next time we'll be looking to see the later arrivals and some of the midsummer birds, and also of course the insects, the dragonflies and butterflies and moths that might be around. So enjoy nature. After all, it's all around you. You've just got to look and listen. Cheerio.